If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. The early morning sun bathed the quiet streets of Ashwood, Virginia in soft light, a typical start to another peaceful day. Evelyn Evie Carter, a spry 90-year-old with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, guided her silver sedan into Jim's corner gas station. Her hair, pulled neatly into a bun, glinted white in the sunlight, and her upright posture hinted at years of discipline. To the untrained eye, she was just another elderly resident of this sleepy town, but Evie carried a history that most wouldn't believe. "Morning, Miss Carter," Jim, the station's owner and a part-time mechanic, called out with his usual cheery grin. He leaned against the door frame of his tiny shop, wiping grease-streaked hands on a rag. "Morning, Jim," Evie replied, stepping out of her car. Her movements were deliberate, steady, a testament to years of military training. She wore a simple cardigan and slacks, nothing remarkable, yet there was something commanding in her air. "The usual?" Jim asked. "Just a full tank, thanks," she replied, reaching for the pump. As she filled her car, her thoughts drifted to her afternoon schedule, a Veterans Association meeting at the community center, where she'd reconnect with old friends who understood her history and shared her experiences. The distant rumble of engines broke her reverie. It grew louder, more menacing, until a convoy of motorcycles roared into the gas station lot. Evie's hand paused on the pump as she caught their reflection in her rearview mirror. 10 motorcycles, then 15. Their riders dismounted, leather-clad and loud, their presence radiating an aggressive energy that unsettled the peaceful morning. At the center of the group stood a man with a shaved head, a thick beard, and a leather vest emblazoned with the name Shadow Reapers. His patches marked him as Reaper, the gang's leader. His eyes scanned the lot, cold and calculating, before locking onto Evie. "Well, well," Reaper drawled, his voice carrying easily over the rumble of idling engines. "What do we have here? Grandma's out for her morning drive." Snickers echoed from the gang. One of them, a lanky man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, stepped closer, peering at Evie's car. "Check it out, boss," he said, pointing to her license plate holder. "Vietnam vet. Guess she's seen some action." Reaper's laugh was sharp and mocking. "A woman vet? What'd you do, sweetheart? Serve coffee to the real soldiers?" Evie didn't flinch. She'd faced far worse than this in the jungles of Vietnam. "I flew helicopters," she said simply, her voice calm. "Pulled soldiers out of firefights and brought them home." Reaper's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease, but he quickly masked it. "Cute story, Grandma, but this is our town now, and you're standing in our lot. Show some respect." Evie finished pumping her gas and replaced the nozzle with steady hands. "Respect is earned," she replied evenly, locking eyes with Reaper. "And I've earned mine. Have you?" The gang leader's face darkened. He stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "You've got a big mouth for someone who's about to learn a hard lesson." One of the gang members, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, reached out and slammed her car door shut as she moved to leave. The sound echoed like a warning shot. "We're not done here, lady," Reaper growled. Evie's heart rate remained steady. Years of training kicked in, her mind already calculating options. She thought of a promise made decades ago by Colonel Iron Jack Monroe, a soldier whose life she had saved during a daring nighttime extraction in Vietnam. "If you ever need anything, Evie," he'd said, "anything at all, you call me." For years, she hadn't needed to make that call. Until now, as Reaper reached out to grab her arm, Evie spoke, her voice like steel. "Let go, son, or you'll regret it." Reaper hesitated, taken aback by her composure. "Or what? You'll call the cops?" "No," she replied, pulling her phone from her pocket. "Someone far more effective." The gang burst into laughter as Evie dialed. Snake Tattoo sneered. "What, calling your grandkids to come save you?" Evie ignored them, speaking calmly into the phone. "Jack, it's Evie. I've got a situation here." The voice on the other end was immediate, commanding. "Where are you?" "Jim's corner gas station, Ashwood," she replied. "Bring the guard." Reaper's confidence wavered slightly at her tone, but he covered it with bravado. "Call whoever you want, Grandma. We'll still be here." Evie hung up, her eyes meeting Reaper's without a hint of fear. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. The roar of engines shattered the quiet of Ashwood's mid-morning air. Residents peered out from their windows, their curiosity piqued by the sound of a disciplined convoy approaching. Unlike the chaotic rumble of the Shadow Reapers, this was different. Synchronized, deliberate, powerful. Colonel Jack Iron Jack Monroe led the formation of the Veterans Guard, a group of former combat veterans who had traded their uniforms for leather jackets but retained their precision and camaraderie. Jack, with his weathered face and piercing eyes, exuded an aura of authority that demanded respect. Behind him, 30 bikers rode in perfect formation, their bikes gleaming under the sun, each rider wearing the Guard's insignia, an eagle clutching a shield. The convoy pulled into the gas station, surrounding it like a protective barrier. The Shadow Reapers, who moments before had been laughing and jeering, now shifted uncomfortably. The stark contrast between their unruly chaos and the Guard's disciplined order was impossible to ignore. Jack dismounted his bike, removing his helmet to reveal close-cropped silver hair. His gaze swept over the scene, quickly assessing the situation. When his eyes landed on Evie, his expression softened slightly. "Evie," he greeted, his voice warm but tinged with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Jack," she replied, her tone steady. "But these boys need a lesson in respect." Jack's eyes hardened as he turned to Reaper. "You're standing on the wrong side of history, son." Reaper straightened, trying to reclaim his bravado. "We don't back down, old man. This is our town now." Jack stepped closer, his presence radiating quiet menace. "Not anymore." The Shadow Reapers shifted uneasily as the Veterans Guard dismounted, their movements purposeful and united. Reaper's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt as he realized just how outmatched they were. The air at Jim's corner gas station grew heavy with tension, as if the quiet town of Ashwood held its breath. The Shadow Reapers, previously brimming with unchecked bravado, now exchanged uncertain glances. Their bikes idled, creating a low rumble that seemed to mirror their unease. Meanwhile, the Veterans Guard stood silent and immovable, a wall of discipline and resolve. Jack Monroe surveyed the scene, his piercing eyes locked on Reaper. "You've got one chance to walk away," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Take it." Reaper's jaw tightened as his gang looked to him for guidance. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by someone who radiated such quiet authority. "You think you scare me?" he growled, trying to mask his unease. "We don't back down from anyone." Jack tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about fear. It's about understanding what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Reaper's lips curled into a sneer. Big words from a man hiding behind a bunch of geriatrics. One of the Veterans Guard, a tall, muscular man named Sam Tank Johnson, stepped forward. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms lined with tattoos and scars. "Call us geriatrics again and I'll give you a free anatomy lesson," he said, his deep voice carrying a menacing edge. Reaper took a half step back, his bravado faltering. "You don't want this fight," he said, gesturing to his gang. "No," Jack replied, his tone icy. "You don't." The Shadow Reapers make their move. Reaper's pride refused to let him back down. With a quick nod, he signaled to his gang. The Shadow Reapers revved their engines, the noise building into a deafening roar. Townsfolk watching from their windows gasped, expecting an all-out brawl. But Jack held up a hand, and the Veterans Guard remained still. Not a single man moved, their discipline a stark contrast to the chaos of the Reapers. Reaper dismounted his bike and approached Jack, standing just inches from him. "You think you're tough?" he spat. "We run this town, not you, not her." He pointed at Evie, his finger trembling slightly. Jack leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that everyone could hear. "You've made two mistakes today. The first was underestimating us. The second was threatening her." Before Reaper could respond, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. His head whipped around, and his gang's confidence visibly crumbled. Two police cars, their lights flashing, pulled into the gas station lot. Behind them, a black SUV rolled up, unmarked but undeniably official. Reinforcements arrive. Out of the SUV stepped Chief Alan Rivera, Ashwood's police chief. A burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, Rivera had served 2 tours in Iraq before returning home to lead the town's police force. He adjusted his hat and strode toward the standoff, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the Shadow Reapers. "What's going on here?" Rivera demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Reaper turned, his bravado reignited. "Just a little misunderstanding, Chief. No need to get involved." Rivera's gaze flicked to Jack, then to Evie, and finally back to Reaper. "This doesn't look like a misunderstanding to me. It looks like you're picking a fight you can't win." Reaper bristled, but before he could respond, Rivera raised a hand. "I've had complaints about your gang for months. Extortion, harassment, property damage. I've been waiting for an excuse to bring you in." Reaper's face turned red. "You've got nothing on us." "Maybe not yet," Rivera said, his voice low, "but give me time." A warning Jack stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. "This is your chance to leave. Walk away now, and no one gets hurt." Reaper hesitated, torn between retreat and maintaining his dominance. The weight of the Veterans Guard's presence, combined with the arrival of law enforcement, tipped the scales. "This isn't over," Reaper spat, his voice full of venom. He turned to his gang. "Let's go." One by one, the Shadow Reapers mounted their bikes and roared out of the gas station, their departure a mix of frustration and humiliation. Reaper lingered for a moment, glaring at Jack and Evie, before revving his engine and peeling out of the lot. Aftermath. As the dust settled, Jack turned to Rivera. "Thanks for showing up when you did." Rivera smirked. "You looked like you had it under control, but I figured a little backup wouldn't hurt." Evie stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "They'll be back," Jack nodded. "I know, and when they do, we'll be ready." Rivera placed a hand on his hip. "You might want to set up a more permanent presence in town. This feels like the start of something bigger." Jack exchanged a glance with Evie, who gave a subtle nod. "We'll take care of it." As the Veterans Guard began to remount their bikes, Evie turned to Jack. "This isn't just about me anymore, is it?" "No," Jack said, his expression serious. "This is about Ashwood." The morning after the tense standoff at Jim's corner gas station, Ashwood seemed deceptively peaceful. The early light streamed through the windows of Diana's diner, where Evelyn Evie Carter sat at her usual booth, sipping her coffee. Across from her, Colonel Jack Monroe leaned back in his seat, his piercing eyes scanning the quiet street outside. "You know they're regrouping," Evie said, breaking the silence. Her tone was calm but carried an edge of resolve. Jack nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "They'll lick their wounds for a bit, but they'll come back, angrier and more organized. Reaper's not the type to take humiliation lightly." Evie smiled faintly. "Good. That'll make them predictable." Jack chuckled. "Still the strategist, aren't you?" Before she could reply, the bell above the diner's door chimed, and Chief Alan Rivera walked in, his presence commanding the attention of the room. He approached their booth and slid into the seat next to Jack, nodding at both of them. "Morning," Rivera said, his voice low. "I've been thinking about last night." "And?" Evie asked, her eyes narrowing. Rivera leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Reaper's got connections. I've been tracking his gang for months, and they've been branching out. Extortion, drugs, weapons. What happened yesterday? That was just a skirmish. If they're backed into a corner, they'll escalate." Jack exchanged a glance with Evie. "How much support do you have from your department?" Rivera grimaced. "Not enough. I've got a few good men, but this town's budget doesn't exactly prioritize law enforcement. Reaper's crew outnumbers us at least 3-1. Evie took a slow sip of her coffee before speaking. "Then it's a good thing you're not in this alone." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "The Veterans Guard?" Jack nodded. "We're already mobilizing. We'll increase our patrols and keep an eye on key locations. If Reaper tries to pull anything, we'll be ready." Fortifying the town. By midday, Ashwood was buzzing with activity. The Veterans Guard had set up a temporary command center at the old fire station, which had been out of use for years. It was the perfect base of operations, centrally located and spacious enough to house their equipment and personnel. Evie walked through the makeshift headquarters, observing as the veterans worked with military precision. Maps of Ashwood were pinned to the walls, marked with key locations. The gas station, Diana's diner, the hardware store, and other local businesses that might be targeted. Sam Tank Johnson, the imposing veteran who had confronted Reaper the day before, approached Evie with a clipboard. We've got patrols running every 2 hours. Cameras are being installed at all major intersections, and we're coordinating with Rivera's team for response times. Evie nodded approvingly. Good work, Tank. What about communication? Sarah's handling that, Tank replied, gesturing toward a corner where Sarah McAllister, a former communications officer, was setting up a radio network. Her fingers flew over the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. Evie approached Sarah, her presence drawing the younger woman's attention. How's it coming? Sarah glanced up, her face lighting up with determination. We've got a secure line set up. If anything happens, we'll know immediately. Evie placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Well done. This town's lucky to have you. The Shadow Reapers regroup. Meanwhile, in a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, Reaper stood at the head of a long table, surrounded by his gang. The atmosphere was tense, the room dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. This town thinks they've won, Reaper growled, slamming his fist on the table. They think a bunch of washed-up soldiers and a retired grandma can stop us? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, though not all of them looked convinced. Snake, the lanky man with the tattooed neck, shifted uneasily in his seat. They're not just soldiers, Snake said, his voice hesitant. They're organized, disciplined. That's not something we're used to dealing with. Reaper shot him a glare. And what do you suggest? We run? Give up our territory? Snake shook his head quickly. No, but we need a better plan, something that hits them where it hurts. Reaper's eyes narrowed, his mind already racing. Then we'll target the town itself, the places they care about, the people they're trying to protect. One of the gang members, a burly man named Diesel, spoke up. That'll bring the heat down on us even harder. Reaper grinned, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Exactly. Let them come. We'll make Ashwood a battlefield, and we'll show them what real power looks like. Rallying the town. Back at the fire station, Evie and Jack stood before a gathering of Ashwood's residents. Business owners, families, and community leaders had come together, their faces a mix of fear and determination. We're not here to scare you, Jack began, his voice steady, but we need to be honest about what we're up against. The Shadow Reapers aren't going to back down. They're going to fight harder, and they'll target what matters most to us, our town, our people. A murmur spread through the crowd, but Evie raised her hand, silencing them. That's why we need to stand together, she said, her voice firm but encouraging. This isn't just about fighting back. It's about showing them that Ashwood won't be bullied. We're stronger than that. Tom Mason, the owner of the hardware store, stepped forward. What can we do to help? Plenty, Jack replied. We need volunteers to help with surveillance, secure your businesses, and coordinate with the guard. The more eyes we have, the better. Slowly, hands began to rise. People from all walks of life, store clerks, teachers, farmers, offered their support. It wasn't just the Veterans Guard taking a stand, it was the entire town. Preparing for war as night fell over Ashwood, the town braced itself. Patrols roamed the streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness. At the fire station, the command center buzzed with activity as reports came in from the field. Evie stood outside, looking up at the stars. Jack joined her, his presence as steady as ever. You think we're ready? He asked. Evie smiled faintly. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Jack nodded, his gaze hardening. Then let's make sure they regret ever coming here. The stage was set, the players in place. Ashwood was no longer a town cowering in fear. It was a community ready to fight for its future. And the Shadow Reapers were about to learn the hard way that some battles couldn't be won with intimidation alone. The stillness of Ashwood's night was shattered just past midnight by the sudden roar of engines. The Shadow Reapers made their move, tearing down Main Street with reckless abandon. Their headlights pierced the darkness, and their presence was announced by the deafening sound of shattering glass as rocks and chains swung into shop windows. Evie jolted awake at the sound of the commotion. From her bedroom window, she saw the Reapers storming through town. The sight of chaos and destruction stirred something deep within her. Not fear, but a familiar fire she hadn't felt since Vietnam. She grabbed her jacket and radio before heading to the fire station, where Jack and the Veterans Guard were already rallying. At the command center, reports poured in from patrols across town. Sarah, her headset firmly in place, called out updates as they came through. "They've hit the hardware store, the diner, and the gas station," she said, her voice tense but steady. "Patrols are moving to intercept." Jack stood at the center of the room, his expression grim. "Evie, they're testing us. This is about sending a message." Evie nodded. "Then let's send one back." Jack grabbed a radio. "All units, converge on the southern sector. Block their escape routes, but don't engage unless necessary. We want to contain them." Tank stepped forward, pulling on his gloves. "I'll lead the intercept team." Evie grabbed his arm. "Be careful. Reaper's playing dirty, and he's desperate." Tank gave her a nod. Always a trap in the darkness. The Veterans Guard moved swiftly, their training evident in every coordinated movement. Tank's team set up a blockade at the southern end of Main Street, using trucks and motorcycles to cut off the Reapers' escape route. Meanwhile, Jack led a second team to the hardware store, where Tom Mason was attempting to salvage what he could from the wreckage. Glass littered the floor, and shelves had been upended. Tom's face was pale but determined. "They didn't get everything," Tom said, gesturing to the storage room. "I'll rebuild." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "You won't have to do it alone." Outside, the Reapers realized too late that they had been corralled. As they approached the southern blockade, their bikes screeched to a halt. Tank and his team stood firm, their faces lit by the harsh glow of headlights. "You're surrounded," Tank called out, his voice echoing in the night. "Stand down, and no one gets hurt." Reaper dismounted his bike, his sneer visible even in the dim light. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Tank stepped forward, his stance unwavering. "I don't think, I know." Reaper's hand twitched toward his jacket, but before he could draw a weapon, a spotlight flared to life, illuminating the scene. It came from the Veterans Guard, who had positioned themselves on rooftops and at key vantage points. The sudden light disoriented the Reapers, and for the first time, fear flickered in their eyes. "This is your last warning," Tank said, his voice cold. "Drop your weapons and walk away." The Turning Point Reaper hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of the situation. His gang looked to him for guidance, their earlier confidence now replaced with uncertainty. They weren't prepared for this level of coordination or the overwhelming presence of the Veterans Guard. One of the younger Reapers, a wiry man named Bullied, took a step back, his hands raised. "I'm out," he muttered, dropping his chain and walking toward the veterans' line. Reaper glared at him. "Coward!" Bullied ignored him, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Slowly, more of the Reapers followed suit, abandoning their weapons and stepping away from their bikes. Reaper was left standing alone, his pride visibly crumbling. With a snarl, he mounted his bike and roared off into the night, his gang now fractured. Aftermath. As dawn broke over Ashwood, the town began to take stock of the damage. Windows could be replaced and shelves could be restocked, but something more profound had shifted. The sight of neighbors helping neighbors, of the Veterans Guard standing shoulder to shoulder with the townspeople, was a testament to their resilience. Evie stood outside Deanna's diner, where volunteers were already cleaning up the broken glass. Jack approached, his face lined with exhaustion. "They'll regroup," Jack said. "Reaper's not done." Evie nodded. "I know, but neither are we." Jack smiled faintly. "You've got a way of turning chaos into strategy, Evie." She chuckled. "Old habits die hard." Tank joined them, his massive frame casting a shadow over the sidewalk. "We sent a message tonight," he said, "but Reaper's too proud to let this go. He'll come back with everything he's got." Evie's gaze hardened. "Let him. We'll be ready." A new strategy. That evening, the Veterans Guard met at the fire station to discuss their next move. Maps were spread across tables, and plans were drafted with military precision. "We need to take the fight to them," Sarah suggested, her eyes scanning the intelligence reports. If we let them dictate the terms, we'll always be on the defensive. Jack nodded. Agreed. We know their hideouts and their patterns. It's time to show them that Ashwood isn't their playground. Evie placed a hand on the table, her voice steady. This isn't just about defense or offense. It's about showing this town and the Reapers that fear doesn't win. Community does. The room fell silent as her words sank in. Then, one by one, the veterans nodded in agreement. They weren't just protecting Ashwood anymore. They were fighting for its soul. While Ashwood basked in its small but critical victory, miles away in a secluded warehouse, Reaper was planning his revenge. The betrayal by some of his men and the Veterans Guard's show of strength had wounded his pride. But it had also fueled his anger. The Shadow Reapers who remained loyal sat in a loose circle, their eyes fixed on their leader. Reaper stood at the center, pacing like a predator preparing to pounce. His voice, a low growl, carried through the cavernous space. "They think they've won," he snarled. "They think they can humiliate us and get away with it." "Some of the guys are scared," said Diesel, one of his remaining lieutenants. His voice lacked conviction. "They're saying the guard's too organized, too strong." Reaper whipped around, his glare silencing Diesel. "Then they're cowards. If they're too weak to fight, they don't belong here." Snake Tattoo, more cautious, leaned forward. "We need to be smart about this, Reaper. Charging in like last time won't work." Reaper's eyes narrowed. "We're not charging in. This time we hit them where it hurts. We don't just fight them. We tear apart their town. If they want a war, we'll give them one." The guard prepares back in Ashwood. The Veterans Guard was already bracing for the counterattack they knew was coming. At their headquarters in the fire station, Jack Monroe and Evie Carter stood over a map of the town, marking strategic points of interest. "They'll target high-value locations," Jack said. "Businesses, the community center, maybe even the school." Evie nodded. "We need to split our forces, some for defense, others for reconnaissance. We can't let them move without us knowing." Sarah McAllister entered the room, a tablet in hand. "I've got reports of movement near the South Ridge. Looks like Reapers regrouping." Jack looked at Tank, who stood nearby. "Take a team and scout it out. Don't engage, just gather intel." Tank nodded, already pulling on his jacket. "On it!" As Tank and his team headed out, Evie turned to the other veterans. "This isn't just about holding the line anymore. We need to show the people of Ashwood that we can end this." Reaper strikes back. The attack came at dawn. The Shadow Reapers hit 3 locations simultaneously: Mason's Hardware, the gas station, and the community center. The attacks were swift and destructive, leaving shattered windows and flames in their wake. Evie and Jack arrived at the gas station minutes after the Reapers had fled. Jim, the station owner, stood outside, his face pale as he watched firefighters douse the smoldering remains of his storage shed. "They came out of nowhere," Jim said, his voice shaking. "Just smashed everything and took off." Evie placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll help you rebuild, Jim. You're not alone in this." Jack's radio crackled to life. "They hit the hardware store and the community center too," Sarah's voice said. "Minimal injuries, but the damage is bad." Jack clenched his jaw. "They're testing us again." "No," Evie said, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't a test. This is escalation. Fighting back." Later that day, the Veterans Guard gathered at the fire station to regroup. Tank and his team returned with valuable intelligence about the Reapers' hideout, including their numbers and supplies. "They're stockpiling weapons," Tank reported. "Nothing too heavy, but enough to cause real damage." Jack looked at Evie. "We've got the advantage now. If we hit them hard, we can put an end to this." Evie shook her head. "Not yet. If we go in too soon, we'll just push them deeper underground. We need to draw them out." "How do we do that?" Sarah asked. Evie's gaze was steely. "We make them think they've won." Setting the trap over the next 2 days, the Veterans Guard began implementing Evie's plan. They staged a retreat, scaling back visible patrols and reducing their presence at key locations. To the Shadow Reapers, it looked like the Guard was stretched thin and losing their grip on the town. Reaper, emboldened by what he perceived as a retreat, began mobilizing his gang for a final assault. We'll hit them so hard they'll never recover, he told his men, his voice brimming with overconfidence. Unbeknownst to him, the Veterans Guard was ready. Evie and Jack had positioned their forces strategically, using hidden surveillance equipment and choke points to monitor every move the Reapers made. The showdown. The Reapers struck at midnight, targeting the heart of Ashwood, the town square. They arrived in force, their bikes roaring as they descended on the quiet streets. But as they moved into position, the trap was sprung. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding the gang as Veterans Guard members emerged from the shadows. Positioned on rooftops and behind barricades, they quickly cut off the Reapers' escape routes. "Reaper!" Jack's voice boomed through a megaphone. "It's over! Drop your weapons and stand down!" Reaper's bike skidded to a halt. His gang looked to him for direction, but for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. "You think you can scare us?" he shouted back. "We're not afraid of you." Evie stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "This isn't about fear, Reaper. It's about choices. You can keep fighting and destroy what's left of your gang, or you can walk away and salvage some dignity." Reaper hesitated, his bravado cracking under the weight of the situation. Around him, some of his men were already disarming, their will to fight broken. Victory without bloodshed. Reaper finally dismounted his bike, throwing his weapon to the ground in frustration. "This isn't over," he growled. "It is," Jack said firmly. "For you, it's over." As the remaining Reapers surrendered, the town square erupted in cheers. The Veterans Guard had not only defended Ashwood, but had also sent a clear message. Unity and discipline would always triumph over chaos and fear. Evie stood at the center of it all, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She wasn't just looking at the defeated gang. She was looking at Ashwood's future, a town that had learned to stand together against any threat. The morning after the Shadow Reapers' defeat, the streets of Ashwood were quieter than they had been in months. The wreckage from the final confrontation was already being cleared by volunteers, and the air buzzed with cautious optimism. Evie Carter sat on the porch of the fire station, sipping coffee as the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon. Her sharp eyes scanned the street as she reflected on the battle won. The Veterans Guard had succeeded in defending the town, but she knew this was only the beginning. Wounds left by the Reapers' reign of terror would take time to heal, and the Guard's next task was ensuring Ashwood never fell into such chaos again. Jack Monroe joined her, pulling up a chair. He handed her a tablet displaying a list of updates from their patrol leaders. "We've accounted for most of the Shadow Reapers," Jack said. 33 in custody. A few stragglers scattered, but they're not a threat anymore. Reaper himself is being processed by the state police." Evie nodded. "And the rest of the town?" "Surprisingly resilient," Jack said, a small smile forming. "The community's coming together faster than we expected. Businesses are reopening. Mason's Hardware is already fixing up the damage." Evie sipped her coffee. "That's good, but the work isn't done. The Reapers may be gone, but we need to fill the void they left behind. If we don't, someone worse will." Rebuilding Ashwood. The Veterans Guard shifted gears from defense to restoration, rallying the town to rebuild not just its infrastructure, but its spirit. Evie spearheaded a community meeting at the town square, where townspeople gathered to discuss their vision for Ashwood's future. "We've proven we can stand together," Evie said, addressing the crowd. Her voice carried strength despite her 91 years. "Now we need to build something that lasts, something no gang or outside force can tear down." Tom Mason stood up from the crowd. His shop had been one of the hardest hit, but he carried himself with determination. "What about the businesses that can't afford to reopen? We lost so much already." Evie turned to Sarah McAllister, who had been preparing for this very question. Sarah stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "We've set up a fund," Sarah announced. "The Veterans Guard and a few local donors have pooled resources to help rebuild damaged businesses. It's not just about money, it's about support. Volunteers will help with repairs, security training, and anything else you need." The crowd erupted in murmurs of gratitude. Diana, the diner owner, raised her hand. "And what about safety? The Reapers might be gone, but people are still nervous." Jack took the microphone. "The Guard isn't going anywhere. We'll keep patrolling, but we're also training a civilian auxiliary team, locals who want to help protect their own town. Together, we'll make sure Ashwood stays safe. A new ally. As the meeting wrapped up, a figure lingered at the edge of the square. Snake Tattoo, now James Kincaid, watched from the shadows, unsure if he was welcome. After surrendering during the final confrontation, he had approached Evie with an offer to help clean up the mess he'd been a part of. Evie spotted him and walked over, her posture as steady as ever. "You planning on standing there all day?" she asked, her tone teasing. James shuffled awkwardly. "Didn't think anyone wanted me here." "You made a choice," Evie said. "A hard one. That matters. Now, are you ready to prove you've changed?" James straightened, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I want to help. I need to." "Good," Evie said. "Then grab a hammer. Tom Mason needs help rebuilding his shop." A growing network over the next few weeks, the Veterans Guard expanded their efforts, forming alliances with neighboring towns that had also faced threats from gangs like the Shadow Reapers. Evie and Jack led discussions with community leaders, sharing Ashwood's story and encouraging others to adopt similar strategies. Sarah coordinated these efforts, using her technical expertise to set up a regional communication network. "This isn't just about Ashwood anymore," she told Evie during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "If we connect these towns, we can create a network strong enough to prevent this from happening anywhere." Evie agreed. "One town can be isolated. A network can't. The shadow of redemption." Not everyone in Ashwood was eager to forgive the former Reapers. While James Kincaid and a handful of others worked tirelessly to prove themselves, they faced skepticism and outright hostility from some townspeople. At Diana's diner, a heated argument broke out one evening when a local farmer confronted James. "You think swinging a hammer erases everything you did?" the farmer spat. "You terrorized us." James didn't flinch. "No, it doesn't, but I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make up for it." Evie, who had been sitting nearby, intervened. "People can change," she said firmly. "James chose to stand down when it mattered most. Now he's standing up for this town. That takes courage." The farmer hesitated, then sighed. "We'll see," he muttered, walking away. James looked at Evie. "Thanks." "Don't thank me," she replied. "Just keep proving them wrong." A glimmer of hope. By the end of the month, Ashwood was almost unrecognizable. The scars left by the Reapers were fading, replaced by signs of renewal. The town square was bustling, the community center had reopened, and Mason's hardware was fully operational, thanks in part to James and the other reformed gang members. One evening, as Evie and Jack walked through the square, they paused to admire the sight of children playing and families laughing. The darkness that had loomed over Ashwood was gone, replaced by something stronger: hope. "We did it," Jack said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Evie shook her head. "The town did it. We just reminded them what they were capable of." As they stood there, the distant hum of motorcycles reached their ears. It wasn't the chaotic roar of the Shadow Reapers, but the disciplined rumble of the Veterans Guard on patrol. Ashwood was safe for now, but Evie knew the fight for its future was ongoing, and she would be ready for whatever came next. Ashwood basked in the glow of its newfound unity. Businesses thrived, neighbors helped one another, and the shadow of the Reapers seemed to be a fading memory. The Veterans Guard continued their patrols, maintaining a quiet but steady presence, while civilian volunteers joined the auxiliary force to support the town's security. Evelyn Evie Carter, however, remained watchful. She had learned long ago that victory could breed complacency, and complacency was a dangerous luxury. Sitting on her porch one evening, she reviewed reports from Sarah McAllister. Ashwood's success had drawn attention, both positive and negative. "Sarah, what's this about new activity on the county border?" Evie asked, her tone sharp. Sarah, seated beside her with a tablet, frowned. "We've been hearing rumors of a group moving into the neighboring town of Bridgestone. Smaller than the Reapers, but with a reputation for brutality." "Any connections to the Reapers?" Evie pressed. "Possibly," Sarah admitted. "Some of the stragglers who fled Ashwood might have joined them. If that's true, they could be planning something." Jack Monroe joined them, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "You're thinking they'll come here?" "I'm thinking we'd be foolish not to prepare," Evie replied. "Ashwood might be stronger, but it's still a target. And if they see us as the ones who broke the Reapers, they'll want to prove they're stronger." Jack nodded. "Then we keep doing what we've been doing. Stay vigilant." Stay united. A new threat emerges. 2 weeks later, troubling reports began trickling in. Bridgestone residents described a gang calling themselves the Iron Serpents, a violent splinter group that had taken control of the small town's outskirts. Unlike the Reapers, who relied on intimidation and chaos, the Serpents operated with chilling precision. They targeted key locations, leaving destruction in their wake. James Kincaid, the reformed Shadow Reaper now working with the Veterans Guard, brought first-hand accounts to Evie. "They're not like us," he said, his voice low. "They're organized, and they don't just want control, they want blood." Evie studied him carefully. "And you think they'll come here?" "I'd bet on it," James said grimly. "They've got nothing to lose, and they'll see Ashwood as a prize." Evie leaned back in her chair, her sharp mind already working through scenarios. "Then we make it clear that Ashwood isn't for the taking." The Serpents test the waters. The Iron Serpents made their first move under the cover of darkness. A group of masked riders sabotaged power lines leading into Ashwood, plunging parts of the town into temporary blackout. While most residents thought it was a random outage, the Veterans Guard knew better. Jack called an emergency meeting at the fire station. Maps of the surrounding area were spread across the table as patrol leaders reported in. "They're testing us," Jack said, his tone grim, "trying to see how we'll respond." "And we will respond," Evie said, her voice cutting through the tension. "But on our terms, not theirs." Tank, one of the Guard's most experienced members, leaned over the map. "They'll hit again and soon, probably something more direct." Evie nodded. "We need to show them what they're up against. Increase patrols, secure key locations, and reach out to Bridgestone. If the Serpents are targeting them, they need to know they're not alone." Building an alliance. The following day, Evie, Jack, and Sarah drove to Bridgestone. The town was smaller and visibly more vulnerable than Ashwood. Its streets were eerily quiet, and boarded-up windows spoke of a community living in fear. They met with Bridgestone's mayor, a weary-looking man named Harold Green, in the town hall. He looked skeptical as Evie laid out her plan for collaboration. "We've tried fighting back," Green said, shaking his head. "Every time we stand up, they hit us harder." "That's because you're standing alone," Evie replied. "But you don't have to. Ashwood is proof that unity works. Let us help you." Green hesitated. "What's in it for you?" Evie's gaze was steady. "If they take Bridgestone, Ashwood is next. Helping you is helping ourselves. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do." After a tense silence, Green finally nodded. "What do you need from us?" "Preparing for the battle ahead." With Bridgestone's cooperation secured, the Veterans Guard began fortifying both towns. Sarah and her team set up a joint communication network, while Jack worked with local volunteers to train them in basic defensive tactics. Evie, meanwhile, coordinated with James to gather intelligence on the Serpents. "They're planning something big," James reported one evening. "We've got chatter about a convoy heading this way. Weapons, supplies, enough to suggest they're gearing up for a full assault." Evie's jaw tightened. "Then we stop them before they can. An ambush on the road." Using James's intel, the Veterans Guard set up an ambush on the main road, connecting Bridgestone and Ashwood. The convoy, consisting of 3 trucks and a dozen bikes, rolled into the trap just after midnight. Floodlights blazed to life, and Guard members emerged from hidden positions. The lead truck screeched to a halt, its driver blinded by the sudden light. "Hands where we can see them!" Tank barked, his rifle trained on the convoy. The bikers hesitated, but when one of them reached for a weapon, a single warning shot from Jack stopped him cold. The standoff ended quickly. The Guards secured the convoy, discovering a cache of firearms and explosives meant for the Serpents' assault, sending a message. The captured convoy was a turning point. The Serpents, deprived of their supplies and rattled by the Guards' precision, began to falter. Evie used the moment to send a message to the gang's leader, a man known only as Viper. "Your game is over," Evie said in a video broadcast across the region. "You've lost your advantage and you're outnumbered. Walk away while you still can." A gathering storm. Despite the victory, Evie knew the Serpents wouldn't retreat quietly. "They're desperate now," she warned during a strategy meeting, "and desperate people are dangerous." Jack nodded. We'll be ready. As the Veterans Guard in Bridgestone's residence braced for the next wave, Evie couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was yet to come. The Serpents were cornered, but a cornered enemy was the most unpredictable of all. The calm in Ashwood was shattered 2 nights later. The Iron Serpents, desperate to reclaim their power and send a message, launched a coordinated attack. Under the cover of darkness, they set fire to a community warehouse and targeted 2 key utility lines connecting Ashwood to Bridgestone. Evie Carter was jolted awake by the blaring of an emergency radio. Jack's voice cut through the static, sharp and commanding. "We've got fires on the east side of town and a blackout in Bridgestone. Teams are already en route." Evie threw on her jacket, her years of training surging back. Moments later, Sarah McAllister arrived at Evie's porch, her face illuminated by the glow of her tablet. "We're tracking multiple serpent movements," she said. "They're trying to divide us, draw resources away from the main attack." Evie nodded, her mind racing. "They want to stretch us thin. We can't let that happen. We need to hold our ground while keeping the civilians safe." Holding the line. The Veterans Guards sprang into action. Teams were dispatched to contain the warehouse fire, while others secured the damaged utility lines. Meanwhile, Evie and Jack coordinated a defensive perimeter around the town square, where most of Ashwood's residents had gathered for safety. At the fire site, Tank led a team of volunteers working alongside the fire department to control the blaze. The warehouse, though heavily damaged, was saved from complete destruction. Tank's booming voice kept the volunteers motivated. "This town isn't burning tonight. Let's show these cowards what we're made of." In Bridgestone, Sarah and James worked with local volunteers to restore power while fending off small skirmishes with Serpent Scouts. James, armed only with a flashlight and a steel pipe, managed to subdue 2 Serpent infiltrators who had attempted to sabotage the repair efforts. Back in Ashwood, Evie stood in the town square, rallying the townspeople. "Stay calm and stay together," she urged, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This is our town, and we won't let them take it." The turning point. As the night wore on, the Serpents intensified their efforts. A convoy of bikers approached Ashwood's western edge, where Jack and a small team of guardsmen waited. Jack's voice came over the radio. "They're bringing the fight to us, Evie. Looks like they're tired of playing games." Evie responded immediately. "Hold them off as long as you can. Reinforcements are on the way." The standoff on the west side was fierce. The Serpents charged in with brute force, their bikes roaring through the night. Jack and his team responded with military precision, using defensive barricades and coordinated fire to repel the attackers. Despite being outnumbered, the Guard held their ground, their years of combat experience giving them an edge. Meanwhile, Evie and Sarah worked quickly to redirect reinforcements to Jack's position. "If they break through the west, the whole town is exposed," Sarah warned, her eyes scanning the live feed from surveillance cameras. "They won't break through," Evie said firmly. "Jack won't let them. A battle of wits." While Jack and his team held the west, Evie anticipated another move. "They're not putting everything into that attack," she told Sarah. "This leader, Viper, isn't reckless. He's planning something else." Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up heat signatures from their surveillance drones. "You're right," she said. "There's another group moving toward Bridgestone. Smaller, but they've got something big with them. Could be explosives." Evie's face hardened. "They're trying to make Bridgestone uninhabitable. Cut us off from our allies." She grabbed the radio. "James, Sarah, and I are heading your way. Hold the line until we get there." The battle at Bridgestone. Arriving in Bridgestone, Evie and Sarah found James coordinating a desperate defense at the utility station. The Serpents had brought a heavily armored truck loaded with improvised explosives, intending to destroy the town's critical infrastructure. Evie assessed the situation quickly. "We can't let that truck reach the station," she said. "We need to stop it before it gets close." James nodded, determination etched on his face. "I've got an idea." Using his knowledge of the Serpents' tactics, James led a small team to set up a barricade on the narrow road leading to the station. When the armored truck appeared, barreling down the road, James stood firm, waving his arms to signal the driver. The truck slowed, its driver confused by the lone figure. That hesitation gave Evie and Sarah's team the opening they needed. From a hidden position, they fired tear gas canisters into the truck's vents, forcing the driver and his crew to abandon the vehicle. As the Serpents scrambled, the Veterans Guard moved in, securing the explosives and capturing the crew. The utility station and Bridgestone were saved. The final stand back in Ashwood, Jack's team successfully repelled the Serpent assault, forcing the gang to retreat. The battle had taken its toll, but the guard remained standing, bloodied but unbroken. Evie, Sarah, and James returned to Ashwood at dawn, greeted by cheers from the townspeople. Though exhausted, Evie couldn't help but smile. They had faced the Serpent's full fury and emerged victorious. A town united. In the days that followed, Ashwood and Bridgestone worked together to repair the damage and strengthen their defenses. The Serpents, realizing they were outmatched, began to disband, their leader Viper fleeing the region. The victory wasn't just a triumph of strength, it was a testament to the power of unity. The two towns, once vulnerable and isolated, had become a beacon of resilience. Evie stood in the rebuilt town square, watching as children played and neighbors laughed. Jack joined her, his expression one of quiet pride. "You did it, Evie," he said. "No," she replied. "We did it, all of us." Ashwood had proven that strength didn't come from fear or violence. It came from community, courage, and the unwavering belief that even the darkest night could give way to dawn. The aftermath of the Serpents' defeat brought a renewed sense of purpose to Ashwood and Bridgestone. The towns were no longer just neighbors. They had become partners in resilience, their bond forged through shared trials. The Veterans Guard, now a symbol of unity and protection, expanded their efforts, ensuring no town in the region would face such threats alone again. Evelyn Evie Carter, the woman who had sparked it all with a single phone call, became a local legend. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Evie remained focused on the future. She knew that lasting change required more than just defeating an enemy. It required building something stronger in its place. Building a legacy. The Veterans Guard established a permanent headquarters at the old firehouse in Ashwood, transforming it into a community center. The center offered job training, counseling, and mentorship programs for at-risk youth and reformed gang members. The idea was simple: give people a chance to rebuild their lives, just as James Kincaid had. James, now a respected leader in the Guard's civilian auxiliary, worked tirelessly to help former Serpents and Reapers integrate into the community. "People can change," he often said. "They just need someone to believe in them." One such person was Ethan Viper Green, the former leader of the Iron Serpents. After weeks on the run, Ethan returned to Ashwood, tired and broken. Evie herself met with him, her sharp eyes piercing through his facade of bravado. "You came back," she said simply. Ethan nodded, his voice trembling. "I don't know why. Maybe because this place, it feels different." Evie's gaze softened slightly. "Because it is. If you're serious about change, we'll help you. But you have to be willing to earn it." Ethan took the offer, working under James's mentorship. Slowly, he began to shed the shadows of his past, becoming another testament to the town's transformative power. Recognition and reflection. Months later, a ceremony was held in Ashwood's town square to honor the Veterans Guard and the townspeople who had stood together against the Serpents. The event drew attention from across the state, with reporters, dignitaries, and veterans from other regions attending. Evie, as the keynote speaker, stood before the crowd, her small frame exuding an aura of quiet strength. Behind her, a newly erected monument bore the inscription, "Strength through unity, courage through compassion." Her speech was simple but powerful. "This town wasn't saved by me, or by the Guard alone. It was saved by all of you. By people who chose to stand together, to fight for what's right, and to believe in the power of community." That's the legacy of Ashwood, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find the light. A future of hope. As the months turned into years, Ashwood and Bridgestone flourished. The community center became a model for other towns facing similar challenges, and the Veterans Guard's influence grew beyond the region. They became more than a group of retired soldiers. They became mentors, protectors, and advocates for peace. Evie continued to play a central role, though she often joked about finally being able to slow down. "I've earned a rest," she'd say, though she rarely took one. Her porch became a gathering spot for young and old alike, a place where stories were shared, advice was given, and the next generation of leaders was inspired. The quiet hero. On a crisp autumn evening, Evie sat on her porch, wrapped in a warm blanket. The streets of Ashwood were quiet, the town bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Jack Monroe joined her, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Busy day?" Jack asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Always," Evie replied with a chuckle, "but it's a good kind of busy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world they had helped rebuild. Children rode their bikes past, waving as they went. A group of teenagers wearing patches from the Veterans Guard's youth program laughed as they headed to the community center. Jack raised his mug in a toast. "To Ashwood, and to you, Evie." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom of a life well lived. "To all of us, Jack, to what we've built and what's still to come." A lasting legacy. As the years passed, Evelyn Carter's name became synonymous with courage and compassion. Her story and that of Ashwood became a symbol of what could be achieved when people stood together against fear and division. In the heart of Ashwood, the monument bearing her words stood as a constant reminder. Strength through unity, courage through compassion. Evie's porch remained a beacon for those seeking guidance, her presence a quiet but steadfast anchor for the town she loved. And though she often downplayed her role, everyone in Ashwood knew the truth. It all began with one woman, one phone call, and an unyielding belief in the power of community. The darkness had come, but Ashwood had found its light, and Evelyn Carter had shown them the way. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.